not on the plumb line, then you're incorrect. Strongholds in our mind affect how we feel and how we respond. Amen. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Amen. The way he thinks is the way he responds. I've heard this said, and I'll repeat it. You cannot think wrong and do right.
That's right.
You cannot think wrong and do right. It's a possibility. So how you think and what your mind is set is going to determine how you respond. What your mind thinks is going to determine how you feel. If you think somebody's done you wrong, you're going to feel angry. If you think that same person was just joking and you didn't take it serious, you're not going to feel the same way. The way you think about a thing determines how you feel about a thing.
Amen.
You can govern your reactions by governing your thoughts.
Right.
You can take it a certain way in your mind. You can evaluate a thing in your mind one way. You can tell your mind, listen, mind, here's the deal. I don't care what they did. I have an obligation to truth. Therefore, I'm not going to allow you to take me in a direction that will cause God to be dishonored. Amen? So you have something to say about it. So your mind represents that, and it causes you to move in a way that is correct if you allow God to work in your mind. But when there's a stronghold in your mind, then you're going to be affected in a way that might not be God honoring. Strongholds in the mind really come from lies.
Oh, my Lord.
Lies that the enemy leads us to believe. Lies that take us away from the truth of God. Remember, man got off of the track with God. He got off of the mark in the very beginning of human history when a lie came and he bought it, or she bought it, and then they bought it. Yeah. Amen? Just a little twisting of truth, just a little deviation. Remember, if you are a surveyor and you're trying to project a line straight down for so many yards or miles or however distance, the further you off that mark at the beginning, the further it's going to be at the end. It's like a triangle. It opens up and it becomes larger and larger. The further and further you get away from that mark, the wider and wider the gap comes from being where it ought to be. And so this was to happen in our beginning as the human race is recorded in the book of Genesis. The enemy gave Eve another thought. A thought that was contrary to the thought of God. I mean, that's the whole problem with sin. Sin could be said to be just an opposing thought. When you read Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel, when they talk about the anointed cherub, they talk about Lucifer, the son of the morning, who said in his heart, I will ascend into the throne of God, I will exalt myself. It was a thought that he had that was contrary, a thought that did not harmonize with the thoughts of God that brought sin into the universe. Yes, a stronghold in the mind is another thought. Now, how are strongholds established? How do they get into the mind of people? I just gave you an example with Eve, okay? The enemy shared with her something that was contrary to the mind of God, and she accepted it. Our thinking patterns are established by what we hear, by what we see, by what we feel, by what we experience. We see something, we hear something, we feel something, we experience something, and our minds take those words and those things that have been seen and the things that we feel and the experiences that we have, and it brings them into this place of evaluation and consideration. And when we come up with our conclusion, that becomes our mindset. What we're taught, what we hear, becomes our mindset. And that mindset, whenever that mindset opposes and exalts itself against the knowledge of God, it becomes a spiritual stronghold. When we internalize and evaluate those experiences, those things that we have heard, those things that we have seen, those things that we feel and experience, when we internalize them, we establish a mindset, and if it's contrary to God, it's a spiritual stronghold in the mind. In the late 1930s, a man arose in Germany named Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler began to speak certain things into the nation. He began to tell the people of Germany that they were a superior people, that somehow they were better than other people. And the reason that they had problems was because there was a group of inferior people who was taking advantage of them and causing them to have a lot of bad experience in life and bad results in life. And if they could just get rid of those people, then things would be wonderful for them. Because after all, they were the best people on the planet. That's one place that racism and racial superiority became prevalent. And the nation at large, a whole nation of people, not every single person, but enough to make a difference, drank that cup, drank that poison into their minds. And they began to believe that. And as a result of what they believed, millions of people died. Over 8 million Jews, and a whole world war ensued. Thousands upon thousands died because they had a mindset that produced in them the kind of destruction that followed. Those people really believed that was true. They really believed that was true. When our country began, it was to be a country of freedom and opportunity. And when the people who run the economy began to discover they had a precious economy, they had a precious commodity called an African that they could enslave and do all their work for nothing, they began to create an attitude of racial superiority. There were books, there were teachings, there were things that were done to support slavery by saying that a person of African descent was not on the same level. They were not equal in their humanity. Yeah, they may have been human, but they were a little bit subhuman. They were kind of less than the other people who were running the country. And as a result of that, we spent hundreds of years in slavery, another 100 or so years in segregation and Jim Crowism, because there was a mindset, there was a stronghold in the minds of many people concerning how they looked upon people that were other than them. That was a stronghold. How did it get established? It got established through greed. It got established through the desire to make money and to have labor as cheap as you could have it. And so if we take this group of people and we enslave them, then we won't have to pay them and we will become rich. And how are we going to keep the people who begin to ask us questions about whether this was right or not? We'll just teach them that God made them slaves, that God ordained that they should serve us. This became a mindset. This became a stronghold in the minds. Listen, I've dealt with people, even in this generation, who in some sense couldn't help how they felt toward people of color. It was just so ingrained into them. It was in their mind. It was a stronghold in their mind. And they knew better on one hand, but on another hand, this thing was so in them that it was hard for them to get away from it. That's what happens when a stronghold takes your mind. You know, in conjunction with that, I think there are a lot of people of color who, on the opposite side, begin to develop what I call a black inferiority complex. What do you mean a black inferiority complex? Their experiences, the things that they heard, the things that they saw, somehow made them conclude that maybe they were a little less because the other people had all the good stuff and we had all the bad stuff. How do you put that together? How does your mind resolve that? If you don't have enough knowledge, if you don't have enough history, or information rather, if you don't know enough history, you might be forced to come to a conclusion that, well, maybe, just maybe, they might be better, because if we were better or if we were equal, we would have some of the same things. But if you don't understand the dynamics of culture, of history, of finances, of control, you can't bring that into your thinking to be able to come up with the right conclusion about that. Now, some people were able to. Some people from Jump Street never really accepted that. Some black people, they never accepted it. But everybody's not the same. Everybody doesn't have the same thought pattern. Everybody doesn't have the same experiences. And some of us, and not just a few, but many, began to see themselves as inferior. And then God brought some people into the nation. You know, I'm not a Muslim, I'm not a black Muslim, I'm not in the Nation of Islam, but there's one thing, that people like that introduced into the black culture, and that was a sense of self-worth, of what we call black pride. And it began to attack the mentality of black inferiority. I was a good student in college. I graduated top of my class. I was a senior class president. I graduated summa cum laude. And but in my class, I remember being in my speech class. And in my speech class, of course, you know, just like most of our experience, unless you're actually raised in the ghetto and stay there, you're going to encounter people of other cultures, predominantly white cultures in America. So in my college, they were there, and they were the majority. And I was in this speech class, and my teacher was a little short, blonde, blue-eyed Southern belle. I mean, she talked with a Southern accent. And so when I gave my speech, when I had to present my speech, I was very uncomfortable. And I gave a stilted, ineffective speech. And I remember what she said to me. Brent Bowles, you can do better than that. And when she said that to me, something in me cried out and said, but you don't understand. You don't understand. Now, I didn't say that to her, but that was what was going on in me. What was it that I was saying? Well, as I came to understand myself and understand the situation and evaluate what was happening, what I understood was that I was a black person giving a speech to a predominantly white audience, and my history is of being rejected and not accepted. My history is being considered less by them. It was a pressure-packed situation, emotionally and psychologically.